Think about the last time you stood in front of a grocery store meat aisle. Chicken breast, ground beef, a slab of salmon on ice. Ordinary choices. You barely think about them, but the real answer for why those are the only choices is far stranger than you've ever considered. Because somewhere in that aisle there is an entire category of meat missing. Not hidden, not expensive, not rare, simply absent. No lion, no wolf, no hawk, no shark steak sitting next to the tuna. Every culture on every continent, across thousands of years of hunger, war, famine, and desperation, arrived at the same unspoken rule. Don't eat the hunters, eat the hunted. You've never questioned this. Why would you? It feels like common sense, the same way gravity feels like common sense. But common sense is usually just an ancient lesson so old that nobody remembers learning it. And this lesson goes deeper than taste, deeper than danger, deeper than culture. It's written into your biology, into your instincts, into the quiet part of your brain that recoils at the thought of eating something that once had claws. So what is actually going on here? What did your ancestors know that you've simply inherited without ever being told? Start with the obvious explanation, the one most people reach for first. Predators are dangerous to hunt. A deer doesn't fight back the way a wolf does. A rabbit doesn't have teeth built for tearing flesh. Surely that's the whole story. Difficulty, risk, common sense. Except it isn't. Humans have hunted far more dangerous things than wolves, elephants, buffalo, whales the size of buildings. Danger never stopped human appetite before. So danger alone can't explain a taboo this consistent, this ancient, this universal. Something else is happening. Something hidden inside the predator's own body, built up quietly over its entire life. Waiting. To understand it, you have to follow a single toxin on its journey through a food chain. Imagine a small fish swimming through water that isn't perfectly clean. Never is. Trace amounts of heavy metals, industrial runoff, natural toxins from algae. The fish absorbs a tiny bit. Not enough to hurt it. Not enough to notice. Then a slightly bigger fish eats that small fish. And here's the part that changes everything. The toxin doesn't disappear when the small fish is digested. It doesn't get broken down and washed away. It transfers. It moves into the tissue of the animal that ate it, and it stays there, added to whatever traces that animal already carried. Now repeat that 100 times, 1,000 times. Every predator eating dozens of prey animals across a lifetime, and every single one of those prey animals carrying its own small trace forward. None of it resets. None of it disappears. It only accumulates. Scientists have a name for this. Biomagnification. In plain terms, it simply means that toxins get more concentrated the higher up the food chain you climb. A single unit of poison in the water might be harmless, but stack 1,000 of those units inside one animal's body, and you no longer have a harmless trace. You have a weapon. Think of it like compound interest, except the currency is poison instead of money. A small deposit at the bottom of the chain barely registers. But that deposit never gets withdrawn. It only gets added to transaction after transaction, meal after meal, generation after generation. And the animal at the very end of that chain isn't just holding a slightly bigger balance. It's holding the sum of every transaction that ever happened beneath it. That's what makes an apex predator's body so different from every other creature sharing its habitat. It isn't just older or stronger, it's saturated. So what happens at the very top of that chain? At the apex predator, the animal with nothing left to hunt it, it becomes something closer to a container, a living archive of every toxin every one of its meals ever carried, compressed into a single body, stored for years. And when a human eats that animal, they aren't eating one creature's worth of exposure. They're eating the final, most concentrated layer of an entire ecosystem's worth of poison. Nowhere does this show up more brutally than in the Arctic. Picture a European expedition, centuries ago, stranded on ice with dwindling supplies. Desperation setting in. Someone manages to kill a polar bear, and for a moment it feels like salvation. Meat, fat, survival. But the local Arctic hunters who guided These expeditions always gave one very specific warning. Never eat the liver, not even if you're starving, not even if it's the last food left. To outsiders, this sounded like superstition, an old wives' tale from people without modern science. So, what happened to the explorers who ignored it? In 1597, a Dutch crew trapped on a frozen island ran out of food and turned to a polar bear they'd killed. Within hours of eating the liver, they were violently ill, doubled over, terrified they were dying. In 1853, an American explorer wrote dismissively about the old warning, calling it folklore, right before he ate bear liver himself, and was struck with the exact same symptoms he'd mocked as myth. Decades later, in the early 1900s, explorers stranded in the Antarctic were forced to eat their remaining sled dogs' livers to survive after losing a teammate to a crevasse. Neither man who ate that liver walked away from the experience the same. What was actually happening to them? The answer is vitamin A. Not a small amount, an almost unbelievable amount. Vitamin A is essential for your body in tiny doses, but in overwhelming quantities, it becomes toxic, causing nausea, dizziness, skin peeling, and in severe cases, death. Your own liver stores a modest reserve of it. A polar bear's liver stores it by the millions of units because the bear eats seals, and the seals eat fish, and fish absorb it from algae at the very bottom of the chain, and every step upward concentrates it further. One organ, one bite, crosses the line from nutrient into poison. And it isn't only vitamin A. Some researchers point to heavy metals like cadmium accumulating through this exact same upward climb. Different chemicals, same mechanism, the predator's body becomes a concentrator, a storage tank for everything toxic that ever passed through everything it ate. Here is what should stop you for a moment. Arctic communities never had laboratories. They never measured vitamin A in international units. They never used the word biomagnification. But they didn't need the science to know the pattern. Eat that specific organ from that specific animal and people get sick or die. So the warning became sacred, passed down, never broken. Not because anyone understood the chemistry, but because generations of trial and error had already written the lesson into memory, encoded as a rule instead of an equation. And here is the detail that should genuinely unsettle you. This same warning, leave the apex predator's organs alone, shows up independently across cultures that never met each other. Separate continents, separate centuries, separate languages. No shared laboratory, no shared textbook, and yet the same conclusion arrived at again and again through nothing but consequence. Is that really coincidence? Or is that what it looks like when an entire species learns the same lesson the hard way, over and over until it stops being knowledge and starts being instinct? But the poison stacking up in the liver is only one layer of the story, because once you strip away the danger of toxins, there's a second, quieter reason predator meat was never on the menu. What that meat actually is. Think about the difference between a cow and a wolf. A cow spends its life grazing, calm, repetitive, low stress. Its muscles develop slowly, softly, marbled with fat, built for standing and walking, not for violence. A prey animal's entire biology is optimized around stillness and safety. A predator doesn't get that luxury. Its life is built around bursts of extreme stress. Sprinting after something that's trying to escape, fighting for territory, going days without food, then gorging violently when a kill finally happens. Imagine living that way. Heart slamming, adrenaline flooding your body over and over for years. Never fully resting, always half braced for the next crisis. That stress doesn't just disappear after the moment passes. It settles into the tissue itself. Predator muscle is lean, tough, tightly wound, built for survival, not comfort. Harder to chew, harder to digest. Nothing like the soft, forgiving texture your body has learned to crave. Now think about your own dinner table. You don't crave stringy, gamey, tension-built meat. You crave tenderness, fat. Something your body instinctively reads as safe, easy energy. Prey animals evolved, without ever intending to hand humans exactly that. Predators never had a reason to. They weren't built to be eaten. They were built to do the eating. There's something almost poetic in that distinction, once you see it clearly. The animals humans domesticated for food are, almost without exception, prey species. Cattle, sheep, pigs, chickens, creatures whose ancestors spent millions of years being chased rather than chasing. Their bodies evolved around producing offspring quickly, storing energy efficiently, and yielding easily to whatever wanted to eat them. Humans didn't invent that softness. They simply recognized it and built an entire agricultural civilization around animals that had already been shaped by evolution to be convenient. No one ever domesticated a wolf for its meat. They domesticated it for its loyalty instead, which tells you almost everything about which side of the food chain a predator was always meant to sit on. But there's a third layer hiding beneath the toxins and the tough muscle, and it might be the most personal one of all: disease. Ask yourself this: which animals are biologically closest to you? Not the animals on your plate, the ones that could be. Predators, especially the ones that hunt other warm-blooded mammals, are far closer to human biology than a grazing prey animal ever is. And that closeness is exactly what makes them dangerous. A pathogen that has learned to survive inside a fellow meat-eater, a fellow warm-blooded mammal, has an easier path into a human body than one that has only ever lived quietly inside something that eats grass. Biologists call this the barrier of relatedness. In plain terms, it means the closer two species are on the family tree of life, the fewer adjustments a disease needs to make to jump between them. A virus adapted to a wolf's bloodstream doesn't have to reinvent itself to survive in yours. Both of you are warm-blooded. Both of you share deep, ancient similarities in cell structure and immune response. A virus adapted to a rabbit's bloodstream has a much longer road to travel. Add to that the parasites. A predator doesn't just carry the toxins of everything it has ever eaten. It carries the parasites too, layered generation after generation, accumulating exactly the way the poisons do. A tapeworm picked up from one meal can live inside a predator for years, reproducing, waiting for its next host. And when that predator becomes someone's meal, the parasite doesn't die with it. It simply moves house. Every bite of predator meat isn't the risk of one animal. It's the compressed risk of an entire food chain, handed to whoever eats it last, wrapped in a package that looks, smells, and tastes like ordinary dinner. Humans didn't need modern virology to learn this. They needed only outcomes. The people who avoided predator meat simply survived more often than the people who didn't. Over thousands of years, that pattern stopped being a personal choice and hardened into something deeper: instinct, disgust, taboo. You never sat down and learned to feel uneasy about eating a lion. That unease was handed to you, quietly, by every ancestor who didn't die from ignoring it. So here's the twist that reframes everything you thought you understood at the start of this. You assumed predator meat was avoided because it was too dangerous to hunt. Too many teeth, too many claws, too much risk in the chase. But the real danger was never in the hunt at all. It was already sitting inside the animal, quietly built up over its entire life, long before anyone ever threw a spear. Every fish that small fish once ate. Every seal a bear consumed across decades. Every year of stress chemistry burned permanently into tightening muscle. Every parasite passed silently upward through the chain. All of it concentrated, stored, and handed directly to whoever ate that animal last. And that's the part that turns the whole story back on you, because you are, in a very real sense, a predator too. You sit near the top of your own food chain, eating animals that ate other things, drinking water that passed through countless hands and pipes and processes, breathing air carrying its own faint trace of everything industrial civilization has released into it. Somewhere out there, a scientist studying your body decades from now could ask the exact same question people once asked about polar bears. What has quietly concentrated inside you invisibly from everything you've consumed across an entire lifetime? Modern life didn't erase biomagnification, it just changed its ingredients. Microplastics accumulating in fish tissue. Industrial chemicals persisting in soil and water for generations. Trace contaminants moving upward through supply chains the same way they once moved upward through Arctic food webs. Only now the chain runs through factories and shipping routes instead of ice and open water. The mechanism never left. Only the source did. Consider how strange this is when you sit with it for a moment. Your ancestors spent thousands of years learning, through sickness and death, which animals concentrated danger and which ones didn't. They passed that knowledge down as instinct, so effectively that you still feel it today without ever being taught the science behind it. But you are now living inside a food chain your ancestors never had to navigate. One built from packaging, processing, and global supply routes instead of ice, tundra, and open water. The old instinct, avoid the animal that concentrates everything, still fires in your gut. It just doesn't have a clean target anymore. There's no obvious liver to avoid, no elder standing beside you at the hunt, warning you which organ carries the danger. You're left to build that instinct fresh, this time with labels instead of legends, and information instead of inherited fear. The polar bear never chose to become a walking warning sign. It simply lived at the top of its world, and the world climbed into it, one meal at a time, without its consent. You live at the top, too. But unlike the bear, you get to choose, meal by meal, source by source, what you allow to climb the chain and settle inside you. So think again about that meat aisle, the ordinary one you've walked through 100 times without a second thought. It isn't ordinary at all. It's the final visible layer of a rule your ancestors paid for in bodies long before anyone had a word for what was happening. And the next time you stand in front of it, you won't just be picking dinner. You'll be seeing, maybe for the first time, exactly why every choice on that shelf was already made for you thousands of years ago.